Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you have to stop sharing a screen so I can share mine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So just a minute. Okay. Let me know if my screen is visible or not.
Yeah, it is visible.
It's visible, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So yeah, hello everyone. As given my introduction, my name is Hiren Dave. I have total 13 years of experience in various tools and technologies, and specifically, I am working on lots of open source products and all. And apart from that, I am also tech author, blogger, and speaker, and co-organizer at GDG Ahmedabad and Laravel Lab Ahmedabad. Now, this session, the power of open source. This is the agenda of the session. We will first understand what is the open source, and then why we will understand what is the purpose of open source, why we shall go for the open source tools and technologies. And as you may heard about some of the myths around the open source, that open source is not secure and it's not free, and it should not be used. Many big companies are not using it. So we will work around on that, and we'll see what are those myths and what is actually the fact. And then we will go on how you can leverage the power of the open source, and then we will see some of the popular open source product. Now, as it's mentioned that as you are working right now in the as you are in the hackathon, and in future you might be working into some industry. Some of you might found your own startup. Some of you might work on some tools, some product, so many things. I know many of you may have some ideas about it. So this session will help you in terms of let's say if you are working on in a job, or you are working on any of the project, or you are doing an academic project, or maybe you are working with some companies, be it a web application development, a mobile application development, machine learning, cloud, anything. In all those areas, how you can leverage the power of the open source, and what are the tools and technologies which are readily available, so that you will have an idea in terms of what is the existing thing and how you can use it to make your own product. We will see later in the session that there are so many open source products rightly available, using which you can just create an e-commerce application, a blogging website, or let's say you can have your own CMS, ERP, admin panels, mobile applications. So many things are available out of the box, and you can just directly use it. I'm sure many of you might have used it, some of the application in your project and all, but we will go through all these details and make you more familiar in terms of open source. And after the session, I wish that some of you, or all of you, I would say, may contribute to the open source, because it's not, open source is there, it's free to use, and it's not good to just use it, right? It's good, it's beneficial if you are actively contributing into the open source project. And we will also go through it, like how you can contribute into the open source project, so that you will have a better idea in terms of if you want to contribute to the open source project. And definitely this session will help you in terms of understanding the open source tools and tags. And in future, when you are working, as I mentioned, in any of the project, then you will have this idea like, okay, in this project I may use this kind of tool, so that it will make me make my development easy, or it may save my time and efforts, right? So this session will be important for that. And all these things which you are seeing in the agenda, we will cover into the session one by one. Okay, so now next thing, what is open source? So as it mentioned, that open source commonly refers to the software that uses an open development model and the process. Now we will see what is the open development model and the process. And it is licensed to include the source code. So that, let's say, if any tool or any framework or any software is open source, that means its source code is rightly available with you. And depending on the license, we will see in the upcoming slides that what all the license are there, but depending on the license, you may able to use that source code for free, or you may have to pay some commercial pay some royalty or license fees, and then you can use it. So we will see what all those licenses are there and how you can leverage it. And when we say open source, that means a people has right to change and distribute the code as per the requirement. So let's say I want to create an e-commerce application, right? And I am using some ready-made tool, then I can make the changes as per my requirement. So nobody will stop me, and then I can directly use it. And it is driven and maintained by communities. As we say, community, what is community? Community is a it's a group of developers, like you have seen in my introduction, that I'm a member of Google developer group GDG Ahmedabad. Might be many of you are familiar with it, and some of you might be associated with the DSC chapter of the Google program. So this is the program running by Google, and we as a co-organizer, we maintain a developers community where developers can share their knowledge and tell about their idea, tell about their products. So this open source is always driven and maintained by the community, and that is community of we as a developer. I'm sure you all might be joining. Why I'm saying might be joining, because some of you might thinking of doing an MBA. If you are doing an MBA, then you will not be in the tech industry. But if you remain into the tech industry, then many of you will be a developer like me, and I'm sure like you will contribute into the open source tools and technologies. And in future, you may maintain some of the open source products, and you may contribute into some of the open source product. That's my hope from this session. Okay, now when this initiative was started, so the open source initiative was started by Eric S. Raymond and Bruns Pierens, and it was started to promote usage of the open source software back in 80s. Okay, and since then it is working. So many foundations are nowadays are there who are actively contributing to the open source and who are actively managing some of the popular open source product, like mentioned in the start of the session. Linux Foundation is one of the biggest open source foundation, which is maintaining the Linux kernel and the base Linux and Unix operating system. On top of that, so many applications or so many operating systems are built, like Ubuntu and so many things. We will see in the later session, but these are the foundations which are actively available, and they are actually contributing and maintaining the open source product since long. Now, this is the open source development model which is followed nowadays. One is the co-developers. So here the users are treated as a co-developers. Now, when I say users, so I'm sure many of you might have used NPM packages, or let's say some of the frameworks you downloaded from the GitHub. And as you know that in GitHub, if you if you found any issue or any bug, you can report the bug over there, and you may be able to fix it. Like you can fork the Git repository, and then you make the changes and generate the PR. And once the PR is merged, then you are the co-developer of that particular open source product. However, it depends on the owners of the GitHub repository if they want to merge your PR or not. But if they find it worth, then definitely they will merge it. So this is the concept, co-developers. In one open source product, there can be one or two co-owner, but there are lots of co-developers who are actually actively contributing into the open source product. Early releases is an open source model. Let's say I took an help from the community and I asked them to come up with, let's say, a first version. So we build a team of developers who are the core developers and a community, and then they can release the first they can do the first release. Then integration, frequently integrate code and changes from the core developers. So as I mentioned that, let's say I am an open source contributor and I'm maintaining a GitHub repository. Now there are lots of developers around around in the community who are using my GitHub repository, and as I mentioned that, let's say some of them may found a bug, or some of them might have some suggestion for the changes, so they can fork my code, make the changes and raise an PR to me. So then it's up to me whether I want to integrate it or not. If I, as I said, if I found it worth, then I will maintain and upgrade your PR and integrate it with the code, and then you become a co-developer, right? So this is the integration. Frequent version. So as I said, there is some library and all, so there could be a frequent version after integration. So let's say I merged one PR, so I release version 0.01, then I merged another PR, and the another version is 0.0.2, something like that. So right, we can release the frequent version. And it is a community based decision. So many of you might be active in the GitHub, where you will see there are lots of polls going on. So let's say in GitHub, if there is a feature request, then there is a poll among all the contributor, and they all decide at the same time whether we want to add a feature or not. So that's called the community-based decision. There is a poll going on. People will contribute yes, no, and based on the majority and based on the collaborative decision, it is decided that whether we want to do the development or not. So that's a community-based decision, right? So this is some of the open source development model nowadays into the practice. Now, this is an important slide. You all must have to must understand this. There are some lots of licenses. Now, MIT license, Apache license, BSD license, GNU public license, and Red Hat license. Now, when we say license, that means there are some terms and conditions. And we will see in the next slide, all open source softwares are not free. It depends on what type of license you have added to your open source project that defines whether you can this open source is free to use or not. Some of the open source projects are free for the research and development and for the personal use, but when you are doing a commercial usage, you may have to pay royalty to the owners if the licenses are GNU license. So GNU is one of the license where it is mentioned in the term that an owner can claim a royalty. So it is depending on the condition that if owner wants to claim, then he or she can claim. Nowadays, lots of softwares are there which are using the GNU license and lots of commercial usage are there, but that is something, kind of, I would say, illegal thing. Anytime the owner of that particular project can claim the royalty. However, it is not working, but we have seen in the past that this type of disputes are raised. So in future, whenever you are working on any of the product or for any of your client, just make sure that before you use any of the open source software, check the licenses. If it is MIT license, it's fine. If it is Apache or BSD license and Red Hat license, it is fine. But if it is a GNU, then in GNU, there are 2 or 3 versions like GNU 1, GNU 2, GNU 3. Each and every version or each and every license has its own terms and condition. So better to check it. For your development purpose, it's okay to use any of the software. But as soon as you make it commercialize, then this license thing comes to the picture, and you guys have to be very careful about this. It might be possible that you may land up into the trouble if you are using some licensed open source software where the owner has mentioned that you have to pay a royalty or something like that, right? So be careful about reading this. There is a for each and every project, there is a license file attached. If you are not sure what those license file means, then before using it, show it to some expert and ask them if is it safe to use this particular product for the commercial usage or not. For the development and R&D purpose, there is no hold. You can use it for free. Even if it is a GNU license, you can do it. But as soon as you make it commercialized, then it's better to check the license. Okay. Now let's check it out some open source myth. So first is, as I already mentioned, open source is always free. No, it's not free. Free refers to the freedom, not a money. You get the source code on payment and pay for the updates and changes. So it's quite possible that some of the open source product, they are actually used for free. But let's say if you want to make some changes or if you want to make some update, then you may ask the developers of that particular product or particular open source project, and they will charge something to you, and you just pay pay for the updates and changes. So open source is not always free. Another myth is that only small company uses it. So sometimes it is said that open source is used by only the small company. It's not that thing. Open source is used by both small company and the giants. It's not like only the startups can afford the open source. The Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Facebook, there are lots of big companies, big technology companies which are using this open source product. So it's not like only a small companies using it. There are small companies, there are mid-level companies, there are big companies, there are giant companies who all are using the open source product. Another myth, another very popular myth is that open source is not secure. Now this is what I have seen from many of my clients. They used to tell me that, okay, don't go for any open source project because we feel that it's not secure. It's not a correct one. Open source is secure since source code is available and early detection of the risk is possible to fix. So let's say if, because the source code is available, many of you might heard about program called bug bounty, right? So many of the open source owners, they create this kind of competition or hackathon where you are given a product and you have to find a bugs into it, right? So because it is an open source and there are a lot of people checking it, attacking it, breaking it, so it's pretty easy that there is some security vulnerability, it can be fixed. So that's how the open source is secure. And this is the developer model, as I have mentioned, that let the community find an issue and fix it. And of course it depends on the developer, that if there is some security issues, if developer is not willing to do that, then it is not secure. But it's not like that open source is not at all secure. It is, most of the open source products are very, very secure, as lots of research and development is done on it, and many of the developers have find some fixes and find issues and fixed it. So open source is pretty much secure. But again, before you use any open source product, check the issues, check with the developers, check with the community, is it safe to use it or not, just to be on the safe side. Okay. Then another myth is that if I'm using an open source product, will I get any support or not? And again, this concern was raised by my so many clients that okay, I don't want to use an open source software because it's free and nobody is interested to give a support to it. But because it's a community driven, you will get lots of help from the community. Still nowadays there are lots of open source project which is quite obsolete. Many companies start not supporting it, but there are community who is actually supporting it. So you will always get an support if you are using an open source product. And because there's an open source, so anyways, you will be able to change anything. But there are lots of developers and communities are available who can give you support for your open source project. Another popular myth: open source is not scalable. When I say scalable, that means when your applications users are growing, how stable your application is. So let's say, for example, right now there are 100 users. Tomorrow there are 1,000. Day after tomorrow there are 10,000. Then 1 lakh. Then 10 lakh and 1 crore. If user base is growing and still your application is stable, it is performing up to the mark, that's called a scalable thing, right? So sometimes it is a myth that open source products are not scalable. Open source product can only be used for limited number of users, but it's not like that. Popular operating system Linux is used by so many servers nowadays. It's completely open source. 80% of servers are working on the Linux, and it is handling a huge traffic of the users, and it is using huge amount of data, and it is working very effectively. So open source is quite scalable, and it is designed in a way that it can support the scalability. However, again, I would say it depends on the developer, but most of the time open source products are scalable. It is not just meant for the smaller user base, it is meant for the big user base. Okay, now we will see how you can leverage the power of open source. So the first fundamental: don't reinvent the wheel. When we say don't reinvent the wheel, that means if there is an e-commerce open source framework is available, why will you create your own, right? Or why will you create a store from the scratch? There are some npm packages available. Why should you create it again, right? So that's called don't reinvent the wheel. If there is existing project or existing product, open source product available which satisfy your requirement, use it. Don't write it from scratch. You can adopt your open source for the business. As I said, many of you might, as you are participating in hackathon, and you may have some brilliant ideas, and in future you may want to start a business out of your ideas. Then you can adopt the open source for your business. You can build the community across the business. Like I said, Red Hat community, Linux community is one of the biggest community, right? It's built around the Unix and Linux operating system. And you can adopt and innovate open source software. Like I said, you can use some of the open source product, and you can find the issues, fix it, something like that, right? So you can be a maintainer of the open source software, and you can quickly develop a solution. So this is how this is a way you can leverage the power of the open source. Now let's come to some of the popular open source operating system. As mentioned, Linux kernel, Android, Ubuntu, FreeBSD, Fedora, all these are built on top of Linux, or I would say Unix, because Unix is the base operating system. On top of that, Linux and everything is built. But as I said, 80% of servers are working on Linux, right? So that shows the power of open source. It's an open source operating system. It has billions of users of data, and still it is using fine, right? So that's the power of open source operating system. Uh, if I'm sure many of you might thinking about starting a career as a web developer in upcoming years, then these are the some open source product which you might use as earlier mentioned. You know, there's a PHP. It's a server-side scripting language. It's an open source language, and many of the websites and popular product like e-commerce product like WordPress and all, we will see in the next slide. There are lots of products, open source product built in the PHP, which you can use. And this is like, for example, CodeIgniter. CodeIgniter is one of the PHP framework, which is built on top of PHP, which is completely free. There is another, it's not mentioned over here, but there's another popular framework in the PHP called Laravel, right? It is again built on top of PHP. It's completely open source, right? And you can freely use it. Then you have the Apache server, Node.js, MongoDB, React.js, MySQL, Python, FileZilla, Atom. These are some of the tools which is quite available and completely open source. Use it as per your wish, as per your requirement, right? So these are some of the tools and technologies which you will be using in your future. And as a web developer, you might will be able to deal with it. You will create a package. You will create an open source product with all these tools and technologies. Then we come to the open source for machine learning. As we have mentioned that, we have the Keras, TensorFlow, OpenCV, PyTorch. Python itself is an language which is maintained by open source community. Then NLTK, this is the package used for natural language processing. TensorFlow, library maintained by the Google, completely open source. If you are working on, let's say, building some machine learning application, then definitely you will use TensorFlow. But again, these all products are open source, and in future, if you are going to be a machine learning developer, then you will be using these applications in your project. And again, it's an open source, so you can go and check it out, fix some issues, develop your own package, develop your own plugin, something like that. If you are planning to go on the mobile application development side, then these are the open source project. Android, one of the biggest operating system, 100% open source. And many of our Indian mobile provider are using Android, and like for example, Micromax and all, they have adopted the Android operating system and they have changed it as per their requirement. Flutter, one of the most popular framework nowadays, again, open source, promoted by Google, driven by the community, and there are lots of events and lots of conferences happening around the Flutter. 100% community driven, a huge support, lots of plugins, lots of applications are available. Cordova, again, is a hybrid application development framework where you can, it's a kind of a wrapper, native wrapper. So if you have, let's say, a website or a web application, you can wrap it into the Cordova and make it as a native application. Sencha is another kind of a framework. Ionic, Xamarin, React Native, all these are open source product available for mobile application development. In future, if you are working on mobile application project, think about using this any of this framework. It will be quite easy. It will save lots of development and efforts, and you will get lots of help from community, developer, so many things. Now we will go through some of the popular open source product. As I said, Linux, most wanted and most popular operating system. At least it's my favorite. Okay, I'm sure you must have a subject of Unix operating system in your curriculum where you will be learning Linux. Be careful about learning it and pay attention to it. In future, definitely it will be helpful to you. It is widely used for the servers. There are many flavors, as we have seen: Ubuntu, Fedora, FreeBSD, and awesome community support. I would encourage all of you to be a part of Red Hat community. Be a member of it, and you will see there are lots of day-to-day email conversations, weekly conversations, monthly conversations happening. You will see what all things are coming up, right? So this is one of the most open source, most popular open source operating system, which we call it as a Linux. Open source browser. Many of you might be using Mozilla Firefox, right? It is a very popular browser. maintained by Mozilla Foundation, and millions of plugins are available. And again, awesome community support. There are community of Mozilla which actually promote the new version of Firefox, and it's now giving a tough competition to the browsers like Chrome and the Edge browser. Open source Office solutions. I don't know if many of you are using it, but if you are working on the Linux, then OpenOffice is one of the popular open source Office solutions, just like what we have in MS Office. MS Office is not open source; it's a licensed software by Microsoft. So if you are using it, you have to pay it. I'm sure many of you might be using it right now, maybe cracked version or something. But I would encourage all of you not to use this kind of softwares and all, and be careful about it. Try to use open source thing if you fear that there is some issue with if you don't want to get caught into the piracy and all, right? So okay, then we have another popular open source product, which we call it as a WordPress, right? Very popular blogging platform. You can build a website. You can build website on top of it. You can build blogs. Millions of themes are available, millions of plugins are available, and again, awesome community support. My own blog, I'm also a blogger, as I have told you earlier. For my own blog, I'm using the WordPress. Pretty easy to use, very spoofy, very slick to use it, and you can build your blog just in a minute. Just install WordPress, install a popular theme. That's it. Your blog is up and running, right? So that's a power that within a couple of minutes online stores. Again, millions of themes are available, millions of plugins are available, and it's 100% free. Community version is free. There is a professional edition. The company charges for that, but the community version is totally free and for the commercial usage. And you will get lots of community support. There are lots of plugins and packages are available in the Magento, using which you can create and maintain your online store. Another popular open source product, Drupal and Joomla. It's for the CMS, content management system. It's a build. You can build and customize the CMS solution with it. Lots of themes, plugins available, and community support is there. So again, you can use Drupal and Joomla for customizing any solution for your customers, right? So it's an open source, so download it and use it the way you want. There is a popular open source product built on Python called Odoo. It's very popular ERP and CRM platform, and it has customizable. It's built on top of Python, but if you know the Python, then you can definitely work on it. There are lots of, just like I'm sure you must have heard about SAP and all, right? So this is a free version of SAP, you can say, and it is giving a tough competition to the kind of big player like SAP and all. And again, themes, plugins, community support, everything is there. So if you want to build any ERP or CRM platform, you can definitely use it. Yeah, okay, so yeah, that's it from my side. I hope you have enjoyed the session, and now you all are ready to work on the open source platform. Whatever the platforms we have mentioned, there are many more than that. Search for it, contribute, give a contribution to the GitHub repository. As I mentioned, that this is the process of doing it. Go to any GitHub repository, fork it, make the changes, and raise the PR. Be specific in your changes, like what you have done and all. And if the owner of that repository found that your changes are worth, then they will merge it, and then you will become a co-developer of it, right? So be a contributor. Try to use open source technology as much as possible. It's really worthy, and I'm sure this session will help you in future, in your academic project, in your jobs, or if you're planning to start your own business, startup, blog, anything. All right. So yeah, this is my blogs where I'm writing about lots of technologies and all. And if you want to connect me, you can follow me on the Twitter at @Dave, where also I share a lot of update on the technologies, open source, and so many things. So yeah, that's all about the open source presentation. If you have any questions and all, I can take it up now.
Yeah, right. Thank you for the session, and I guess everybody got to learn a lot, and we'll be sharing this on YouTube as well, so that the rest of the people who couldn't join due to classes and all, they can also view it.
Sure.
And one thing that I guess many people might want to know, that how to join a GDG, that is how to join a Google Developers Group.
Yeah, sure. So I can definitely help you. So Google Developer Group has lots of chapters in across the cities. So for example, if I say about Gujarat, then there's a Google Developer Group called in Ahmedabad, Baroda, Surat, in all cities, and I'm sure same things are there in the other states like Mumbai and all. So you have to approach your GDG community. There is a Slack platform, or there's a form which you need to fill up, and also you can be a meetup member. So you can go to the meetup.com, okay, and find the Google chapter in your city. You will be a member of it, and then you will get a lot of update about it. Also, there is a new platform launched by Google itself for mending the community. So there also you can find out your chapter. Okay, let me share that in the chat so everybody can see that. Okay, 1 minute. Yeah, so this is the link, gdgcommunity.dev. So I'm going to put it in the chat so everybody can see that. Right, so you can go to this particular app and find out the chapter which is near to you, and then you can be a member of it. Right, so as you can if you have opened it, on top you will find a link for the chapters. If you click on that, it will show the chapter across the world, but then you can drill down to the India and find out the chapter near you and be a member of it, and then you will get lots of update about events and all. And also, just to because this topic has come up, so let me just share one more link, which is about DevFest India, which is going to happen in month of October, right? So this is the link from where you can register about it. It's an tech event, 3 days tech conference event organized by GDG chapters across the India. There will be lots of sessions for the beginners, intermediate, and advanced level. And it is about, you will also get lots of, able to see lots of job opportunities and so many things. So register for the DevFest India, and you will get lots of benefit out of it.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. So there's a question by Shaugato, that how open
Okay.
source knowledge helps us in our jobs.
Yeah, so yeah, I will definitely answer that. So like, let's say for example, as I mentioned, that you are working in a company, in a web development company, right? And your client came up and say, okay, I want to build an open source software, or sorry, I want to build an e-commerce application, right? So if you are knowing about e-commerce framework like OpenCart and Magento and all, so that's where you can propose your client to use it, and you can build e-commerce application out of it. Similarly, if you are knowing about Flutter and all, you can propose that, and with less effort, and you can save lots of your development effort, and you can come up with the solutions, come up with the innovative solutions. So this is how it will help you in your jobs. You can propose the solution to your clients and companies, and you can work on the open source tools and technologies to build a solution, industry solutions. So this is how having a knowledge of open source help you in your jobs. Yeah, any more questions? Well, okay. If there are no questions, then we can wrap the session.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Thank you once again for joining us and giving us this talk. So it was an informative one. And okay, so let us end it here. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. If there is any question, then you can reach out to me on my blog and Twitter, as I mentioned, right? And I'll be glad to help you. Okay. So thank you everyone for joining this session, and I encourage you to use open source tools and technologies, try to contribute in open source, and be an innovator. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.